It's my great pleasure always to welcome our YouTube audience who either listen or watch. Nice to have you here. Amazing, we have a nice full room today. And also, if there are any persons who are watching around campus on the live stream, I encourage you still, there's plenty of room, come on down. I have two people I would like to share about that have been tremendously significant in my life. Both have crossed beyond the veil. One was a music educator whose name was Roland Wiggins. I don't know that I've ever really talked much about Roland from this vantage point. It's fun for me to be able to remember him today. The other is a person we talk about pretty much every Sunday, who was the person who began the Caron Chapel service and who passed beyond the veil in 2019, Father Bill Helper. These two gentlemen are personal heroes to me. They influenced my life in ways that I could do a whole chapel message just in tribute to them. But the reason I mention them is that the subject for today is valor. And valor is a tricky subject. I've addressed it before in distinguishing it from foolhardiness. But valor falls in the category of virtue to some degree, I think. And what I wanted to do is think back in my life, who epitomizes, who are exemplars of the kind of best of what a human being can be. And Roland and Father Bill surely belong in that category for my life. A segue that helps here is a thing that Father Bill had as his developmental experience, and besides being what I call one of us, a person in addiction recovery, was that Father Bill had been a military chaplain. He served in Korea and Vietnam, served in two different branches of the military, and left and then was called back and regained active duty status and saw combat in Vietnam. I saw old pictures of him out in the dust and had an amazing, amazing story. And when he came to be first addiction counselor here and then was moved into the role of chaplaincy, he drew from that military experience in this setting, because he used to tell me, I was mentored by him for 7 years. I worked alongside of him here in this chapel setting and on this mountain. And there were certain things that he did that reminded me of military chaplaincy, and he said very clearly that he viewed this as a battlefield kind of setting. And I'm not sure that is obvious, but once I think about it, it makes sense to me. There's a war within, and then there's consequences of the war that manifest between. There's an intrapersonal struggle, and there's an interpersonal set of challenges. I don't want to put family members at war with each other, but you probably already have been, right? So I want to spend a little time on both of those things. And first, let's look inside. And I am a person in long-term recovery, and I also am a family member, so I know both of these things. So, valor, I think I already mentioned, falls for me in the category of virtue. And when I was a seminarian, I had not lived in a world that talked about virtue. It just was not a thing that I talked about until I was in seminary, and a lot of words came into my vocabulary as a result of my theological education, and I'm really glad, because I love to bring those words right back into the center of our life. And I think virtue is a word like that. I love to bring virtue back in the center of our life. There was a book by a noted person in the later part of the 20th century that sought to do that. The Book of Human Virtues, I think, is the title of it. But it's hard to steer us towards words that will help us instead of all the words that are out there that I think are questionable in their utility and value that we bandy about all the time. So, in falling in the category of virtue, valor internally takes me down various bunny trails, but I'm going to try and stay to some degree focused today. And what I decided was the best thing that I could talk about was that in mental health care, I'm a mental health clinician, going way back to the middle of the 20th century, where the positive psychology and a discipline of psychology methods called existential psychology, started focusing in the relationship of the clinician to the client on values. Because what was discovered was that this helps. So if we were working with a straw client, let's call the straw client, it's funny, I have an Alfred in the room. Usually if I'm thinking of a straw client, I call them Alfred, but because it's not a super common name, but let's call it Hubert, all right? And if you're a Hubert in the room, I'm not trying to pick on Hubert. So,
that's my middle name.
Oh, no way, that's hilarious. So, no, so much for patient and family privacy, because now I have a first and middle name. So, Aloysius, all right. So, anyway, forget the name. We have a straw client, and values differ from one person to the next. But if we can help the client identify what they care about, that can serve as a horizon marker in the journey of trying to get and stay sober. And that's the journey that we worry about here. Or to come out of depression or anxiety or grief or trauma or whatever. It's really helpful to know what you want. And I say this to you because a lot of you are clients right here. And even if you're family members, to some extent we think of you as participating in the journey of care and wanting you to engage your own recovery. So think about it for a half a second. What do you want out of this? Where would you say that you want this to take you is a really important question. And the positive psychologist, I'm losing the name, Max Ehrman, I think was one, and there's a person who was key in this, but and then more recently, in the last 40 years, that's recent, but in the last 40 years, various disciplines in mental health care, motivational interviewing, acceptance and commitment therapy, and dialectical behavioral therapy. Some of you have had DBT, ACT, or MI. You may or may not know it, but you get a lot of that here. All three of those methods encourage the clinician to sit down with the client and identify what are their values, because this is that helpful. Like, if you know what's important to you, then we can say, how are drugs helping you? You know, duh, like not. But that's part of the whole point, is that when you realize, like, getting stoned or tanked or whatever, metaphor or vernacular you use for your intoxication isn't getting you where you want to be, right? And so then the courage, the valor, is the movement in the direction of what you believe in. That's an amazing thing. And this is why I often think, like, I don't want you to feel sorry for me, but my marriage struggles a little bit because I'm so committed to my work here. And so my wife stays in Delaware, and I come up here for 4 days a week, and 4.5 days a week, and the back and forth is partly because I love being here. I love being here, and that's one of my values, is to continue to answer the call in my life. But I also get to feel like I get to participate in one of the most valorous things I've ever seen, which is addiction being taken on. I think it's amazing. And if you are, like, feeling pretty awful about yourself or whatever, I want to start right away to tell you I admire you. Because there's a ton of people who are not even making this move. And if the shame of what's getting you here is, like, really in your face, please hear what I'm saying. You're at least in a place where you're trying to address it. And I think that's to be really commended. It's awesome that you are actually working on this problem, because there's a huge part of the community out there that is not. They've just kind of surrendered to the reality of, like, oh, I guess I'm going to drink and die. That was what I thought. And honestly, it's what I thought. So a little more about valor and the virtue thing, because I think where that takes me is something I found is interesting. Whether you look at existential psychology, motivational interviewing, dialectical behavioral therapy, or acceptance commitment therapy, when clinicians survey clients about what's important to them, it turns out that even though, like, there are cultural differences about how people feel about sex and various other things, there emerges a set of core values that are the most commonly identified. Isn't that interesting? Like, it turns out most of us care about similar things. And I think it's helpful. I think it's awesome. It makes me hope, because I feel like sometimes in this world it's hard to find hope, but I really want to believe that y'all are decent people, and that what I think is important, you might think is important. And it turns out in values exercises, that's sort of true. I'm looking at one of my favorite clinicians here. And this is like awesome, right? That when we ask clients what they care about, they come up with good stuff. And so what clients care about that merits a valorous attempt to move towards it are, I had a list, but integrity, authenticity, resilience, and honesty. Wouldn't it be great if we lived in a world where people could actually live in those lanes? And what happens is that the brain scientists are helpful here because they can document how that, which is a front temporal lobe intent, when we start with our values and we say what we want to be, we're thinking. But when we're in an addictive down spiral, we're not really thinking, we're just enacting. We're sort of ritually driven by habits that we cannot override. And this is, by the way, helpful information for family members who are like, why is my loved one so knuckleheaded? Well, it's because they lose the capacity to exercise good judgment in the governing of behavior. But that's supposed to come back online, starts here, and actually I'm sorry to tell you, it takes like 3 to 6 months before the brain shows different patterns where the thinker can move and help govern the impulse pieces of us. We need to get our best selves back. That's a way of thinking about what the valorous journey is to get back to the very best of who we are. And which would be an honest and authentic and living a life with integrity. And doesn't that sound amazing? I think it sounds so good. And the sad thing is it's really hard. And what has us, those of us who are wristband people, the addicted client, what has us hostage is really potent. Alcoholics Anonymous is cunning, baffling, and powerful. And you know this, there are clients in this room who have these like glittery wristbands, and the glittery wristbands usually are single, sorry to out you, but of multiple treatments of relapse clients. And they should be seen as somewhat the most valorous, because they're coming back after having had treatment before. Like, I'm sorry, but can we applaud the people who are back for getting more treatment? It is amazing that people are coming back for more treatment. Having had treatment and gone out and having it not work and have the guts to come back is valorous. It's not awful, it's not stupid, it's amazing that people have the chutzpah to come in and say, I will try again. And I think it's values that drive that. It's because people believe that, and it's things like the anniversaries we'll celebrate that make you know it's possible. Or they had 2 years or 5 years, and then, the tailspin gets back in control of and the capacity to use judgment gets taken away. So one of the two of the values I haven't mentioned are spirituality of some sort. Faith, God, ends up on people's values list. Oh, thank God. And family. So what that does for me in this message is allows me to make a transition to the other part of what I mentioned, is the social side, the relational side of valor. Because, the battle that we face is not only to come back to our best selves, or to discover what our best selves might be, and be able to author that best self that we want to become. I think that going backwards is a failed notion. I shouldn't have said that. But I think that the wise, skillful path for the client is not to move backwards. It's to move forwards. Because wherever you were back that you think of positively has some positive, except you still got here, right? So you want to be able to get in a place that you're going to be able to navigate challenges and have new resilience that allows you to navigate the world without this being necessary. But not only do I want to see us become what a virtue model of human person would hold out, I'm so worried about the world that we are living in. I started decreasing my consumption of news because I find it toxic. And also, it's not news anymore, by the way. I'm old enough to tell you that what I listened to 40 years ago was much closer to real journalism. And today, I don't care which side you're on, it's very skewed. And there are lots of good studies about this, and how social media reinforced perception bias, I think is part of that. Like what you see sculpts what they send you. And so all of a sudden, if you're a conspiracy theorist, you're gonna, and if you're a, left winger, you're gonna like, next thing you know, you're gonna be protesting for some, justice cause. And I'm not saying either one of those is per se right or wrong, but it's very sad for me to live in a world where oppositionality has become such a dynamic of what we see. And we see that it's the global level with Ukraine and Middle Eastern situations at the moment, and not just at the moment, thousands of years in both of these places. I'm personally really worried about Taiwan, and I know many of you probably are. But if we can't solve that stuff today. Let's bring it down to the local. And sadly, it's not much better. I see people, one neighborhood has, these posters on their front lawn, and the person across the street has those posters, and they're yelling at each other in the posters that they put on their lawn, And then let's go to the most fundamental social unit in our existence, which is whatever you would call family. And that doesn't mean Norman Rockwell, heteronormative, has to be male, female, and 2 kids and a dog in a car. But family is and family always has been more than that and different than that. All you need to do is read the Bible and you realize families are, if you read it with an open heart, you realize there were broken relationships and weird denominations, but who we choose to surround ourselves with as our kind of like unit is where the addiction war begins to play out as we try to move into integrity and authenticity and honesty. And I wanted to figure out how best to talk about this. And a thing came back to me that I had learned a long time ago. And this is an old thing. So 3 years after the end of the Second World War, 1948, the United Nations, which is this aspirational organization, I find so inspiring, except that it's losing credibility and sway. But the UN's a noble and interesting thing. And it's done various things over the course of its journey that are really interesting. So in 1948, the UN publishes a document that is referred to by people in that world as the UDHR, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Who knew there would even be such a thing? When we have like cultures that have genital mutilation, and we have various other forms of just incredibly, what we view as like horrible behavior on the part of our international and cultural siblings. And yet the UN was able to publish a document that articulated basic sort of things that the members of the UN said we all subscribe to as fundamental. So interesting. And they align up pretty well with the individual values, which is pretty cool. So I should look at my notes, but justice and freedom, those are easy, low-hanging fruits. Solidarity was one of them, and integrity, dignity. Isn't that also the dignity of the human person? And dignity is like shredded in the family ravaged by addiction, right? Like it's so. This is why I was talking, like shame is just so present here, and it's the beacon on horizon thing that I think is really helpful, because in a military environment, if you don't have a mission, if you don't know what your objective is, you can't function, right? You need to be able to identify what is the sort of purpose of the struggle. And we are in a struggle, Father Bill was correct. And it can be really helpful for us to realize, like, what is it that we're going for? And I think the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is interestingly conserved. We want dignity back, we want freedom, we want justice, we want equality is another one. Wow, is that awesome? Like, equality was articulated in 1948 as a fundamental value. This was, I don't know when, I should know history there, when women get the right to vote, or African Americans in our country. We were not yet honoring this in our own sort of functioning as one of the leading entity organizations in the United Nations. But we signed on and said we believe in it, right? And this is one of the sad truths of discrepancy, is that no matter how well we can articulate where it is we want to be, we will not be able to just flip a switch and live into that. And I would love to tell you it's that simple. I have a magic wand that sits on my desk because what I like to do is I frequently pull it. It's astonishing how many times I pull it out because what happens is the client articulates a magic wand kind of thinking. And I'm like, I can help you out, bing, right? And then they laugh, right? Because what happens is that we, in this message, are called to a vision of how we can be better as individuals and better in relationship with one another, and we have a long way to go to get there. We have to claw our way and fight our way through the foxhole and in the midst of incoming shells and all that sort of stuff and sort of hang on to what we believe in, which is decency and integrity and authenticity and equality and freedom and justice. And it is worth hanging in there and not like bailing on the drivers of our trauma and fear that cause us to think Johnny Walker Red is a better answer than healthy conversation. I honestly think sometimes that's the thing that scares most of us the most, which is so sad, is that what would be an incredible move in the right direction is just to talk to one another or to be honest with ourselves. That's how messed up this demon gets in us. And it is very, I just finished 3 days of Zoom training. I'm like, whoa. But it was amazing training. It was about attachment and very complicated forms of addictive presentation that have to do with sex. And one of the things that was so clear in these brilliant trainers who spoke to me about the work that I get to do in my own journey apart was that these things just don't manifest out of nothing. There are studies that show that adverse child experience is a huge driver of what gets people here. And at a larger level, I'm going to say wounding. Gabor Mate, one of the great theoreticians about addiction, calls these things hungry ghosts. And that, like, the suggestion is that we have hungry ghosts in the back that are spooking us. And they cause us to have, sorry to get too technical, but these sympathetic nervous system responses of fight, fright, flees when we just try to do things that other people find as ordinary. And we're inhibited from the capacity to function skillfully, using the Buddhist term. Skillful speech, skillful action is really hard for those of us who have been spooked by ghosts from the past that lurk in the functioning of our radar. Some of you in the room have flinch responses or whatever. That's an intergenerational trauma. Like this week is Passover, and there's a lot of research that's been done on Judaism and how Jewish persons influenced by the Holocaust still have intrinsic panic responses from the violence that was done to their grandparents and great-grandparents. So, again, it's a word of compassion and gentleness that's here in this message, because I do want you to fight, 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 but I also want you to realize that it's not all your fault. You were trying the best you could to survive adversity, and you acquired misshapen wiring in an attempt to survive. But today, we can light the beacon on the hill and know what we want to shoot for, intrinsically and relationally. And it's not complicated. It's not rocket science. We just want to be able to be in right relationship with ourselves and each other. When I studied theology, I will put here soon, but when I studied theology, 3 things I want to say. When I studied theology, one of my other great influences, I didn't mention him, Kendall Solon, told me that if you read scripture, and this is scripture that occupies the whole left side of this table, Islam, Judaism, and Christianity, which was pointed out today. I seem to a lot of it have center place. I should flip them, rotate them, but that's my home tradition. And it was definitely Father Bill's. Anyway, in Christianity, Islam, and Judaism, we share the Torah, the founding documents of the Hebrew tradition. And in those Genesis narratives is a vision of what Kendall Solon called briefly economies of mutual blessing. Not that there wouldn't be difference, but that there wouldn't be discord. That we would be able to be different and love one another. One of my favorite people here, Johnny Guthrie. Is Johnny in the room? I don't think he is. but one of our BHTs has as a tagline of his emails, I see him all the time, why can't we just get along? Right, the Rodney King. And this is the lament of our society. So Father Bill and Roland, I mentioned them at the very beginning. And to me, those two incredible influences in my life taught me two things that I wanted to say to close this message. When I was studying jazz with Roland, he pointed out to me that there was an infinite complexity to jazz. It would just stay hard and complicated for as long as I would stay in the study. There's always somebody who plays better than you, or there's always a new way of going, and it's like Marty's smiling because he knows it's true. And it's just like, and I know Marty continues to study, and I wish I had more time to study. But so Roland, this jazz theory genius that somehow God made possible for me to study from, said, Jack, stay frustrated because that's the only way. If you're going to stay in it, you're going to be frustrated. But celebrate every victory. When you learn a new thing, when you make a new step, it's the person who just sang for us, Allie, this is her last day, but she's continuing to care. I don't know if you heard that. She's going across the street to partial hospitalization. So really proud of you. And so she's not giving up. So you're staying frustrated, but we can celebrate her victory. She completed primary care, right? Which is an amazing thing. She didn't bail, she didn't give up, she did her treatment work, and she stayed clean in a very contained environment, but still, probably awesome. For me to get a week without drugs was unbelievable. And I don't know your story in detail enough to sort of pull out the reality. And then Father Bill. When I first heard him say this, I wanted to make sure, Father Bill, families are weird today, but he used to say always, families back together. And he would interlock his fingers. And if we have a generous notion of what families can be like, I totally agree with him. This is about family healing and family creation, the creation of social systems and networks which foster our flourishing. And it's a long, tough road. It's like learning jazz, but our call in valor is to stay in the game. It's to continue to scrabble our way towards this vision of our own integrity and love in our lives. I don't know how to make it any simpler. I hope you can tell I totally believe this is possible for you and for me and for us.